What follows is something that I produced some time back for my channel. It's something I discussed in a live stream that was a good bit longer, but I pulled it out and excerpted it so that it could be presented as a freestanding thing. It is a project I undertook, an experiment, research I did, an artistic product after a fashion I did in collaboration with an artist. I explore material culture and aspects of material culture that are, in many respects, central to Western culture. At any rate, I'll let myself describe it in what follows rather than putting you through it twice with this brief introduction. I just wanted to say this is content that was on the channel before. Many of you may not have seen it. I particularly like it though, so I wanted to pull out all the other material that was in that live stream and present this on its own. I hope you will enjoy it. The subject of the discussion tonight will be virtue, chivalry as a memory tradition. And in the course of it, I will be looking at etymology, at material culture, at some of the foundational elements of Indo-European culture. I'll be fooling around with the artes memorative, the arts of memory. All of these things, marks, signs, Mark studies, all these sorts of things will be intertwined in my discussion this evening. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you should now be seeing the screen. And in just a moment, in theory, you will be able to see this, which is a group of note, a group of signs. Okay, hopefully this will be visible. All right. So how do I explain what the hell all of this is about? Well, imagine, if you will, that a given culture produces certain objects, and these objects in and of themselves tell you of themselves. So if you take a look at a boot, most of us can figure out that it's designed to go on a foot. If you take a look at the handle of something like a sword, you can tell that it is meant to be gripped. And so by gripping that sword or wearing that footwear, you can experience to some extent how it was intended to be used. Right? Slashing cuts come naturally if you're holding a saber. If that saber has a full guard that wraps all the way around the hand, or an extended pommel that comes out at a right angle, then it's probably designed to stay in the hand even when making big sweeping gestures from horseback, when you can have the sudden shock of your sword smacking into whatever you're chopping at or slicing at. And there's a reason for that perpendicular projection on the pommel of a sword. If you've got a set of stirrups and it's a bar stirrup, then it's very likely designed so that the heel of a boot fits over it. If, for example, you have a stirrup that's rather different from the bar stirrups we're used to, and it has a circular platform, then it can be designed for the ball of the foot to rest upon it. And all of this sounds like, why the hell is he talking about swinging swords, or how a stirrup works, or how a boot heel hooks over a stirrup? Well, because there are behaviors that go with those things. If I have a boot heel that goes over a bar stirrup, then I probably slung my stirrups down closer to having straight legs off the saddle. Of course, not perfectly straight, but that's one riding style, and it keeps you seated in your horse. If you're in heavy armor, you're going to want a saddle that has a high pommel and cantle that locks your body in. And from looking at the objects, the physical objects, we can reconstruct certain things about how they were used. And when you're digging into the past of a given thing, it can be very useful. So archaeologists very often will only have an object that they pulled out of the ground, and they must read that object to learn something about the people who used it, the way it was used, and the broader context can thereby come to life. Now, we do the same thing with etymology. With etymology, we can look at the roots of words. One of my favorites is, the word nice. And nice meant fine or detailed. But by extension, it could also, like, you could talk about nice needlepoint, right? Or nice lace, finely crafted, right? With all kinds of loops and shapes. But that, by extension, came to mean overly concerned with details or frivolous, right? And somehow, or even foolish or stupid or inane. And somehow it's come to mean what it means today when you say, oh, they sure are nice. But if you look at the roots of the word, you can see the transformations it went through as a semantic category in the culture and the language in question. So we can see the same sort of thing if we look at cattle, chattel, and capital. Those three words are linked together as a form of currency with concepts like head count, right? Or, the tax livestock that we are at this point, being farmed in that fashion. So we know that we can kind of engage in reconstruction with words through etymology. We know that we can do it with material objects by allowing them to flower in our mind, to hold them, to interact with them, and to see how they must have been used. What happens if you put those two things together? What happens if you put the physical objects of material culture together with the words for those things, and you consider both of those things in parallel? Well, that's kind of theoretically an interesting pastime. And that's what I did here. But I did not do it arbitrarily. I decided that I was going to look at horse culture. Now, with horse culture, what you have is the idea of a mounted man, which gives us the concept of a gentleman. Now, in English, we just say gentleman. That's the only vestige of it. But we still have the term cavalier. Now, it gets used in a negative sense to be cavalier about a thing. But if you jump over to French, where you have cheval for horse, you also have chevalier, right, for a gentleman, an aristocrat, right, someone who is mounted on horseback. It's the same thing we get with the Romans with the equestrian class, right? These are knights, so to speak, in Rome, and the equestrian class forms the basis for the senatorial class. It's the aristocracy from which the brighter lights among them are drawn. We can see it with Spanish, where you have, caballo, yeah, for a horse. And then you have caballero, right, for a gentleman. So we have the idea of being elevated in status because you are a mounted man. And when I say that I am not approaching this arbitrarily, that's what I mean. What you're looking at on screen before you is the image of a horse. I think this one as a sigil that I created here with a vector illustration program. I think I pulled this from a antique representation of Bucephalus. And this was the horse of Alexander. Now, interestingly, everybody says Bucephalus, he must have been bull-headed, bos for bull and kephalos for head. And this is a horse called Bullhead. Well, that seems silly, odd. It gets explained the wrong way, but it probably has to do with the sign of a bull's head brand on the horse. But anyway, that's what this little sigil was taken from. I found a rendering. Maybe it was on a coin. Maybe it was a vase painting or something, but I swiped it. And that is the horse you see in the center. That is the basis of our consideration, the idea that we as Western men made a deal of a kind with animals, and it extends to things like cattle, but it's summarized in terms of our fundamental culture most perfectly with this image of a horse. Now, around the horse, and you can read these signs clockwise, as I will, you have a number of symbols. These symbols are fundamental elements of material culture. Remember, I said that none of this is arbitrary. The idea is to start with something we know we have in our culture, which is the idea of a gentleman on horseback, being on horseback, being elevated, to be mounted, to be a fighting man on horseback, like we call them knights, right? We call them chevaliers. We have the winged hussars in Poland. We have the equestrian class in Rome. We have mounted knights among the Celts. We have the idea of Arthur and the Round Table. And the idea is that you are a horseman, a knight. Knights on foot never quite rang the same way or resonated the same way in our memory that a mounted warrior does. So the basis is that in our culture, horse culture, which is a unifying feature of Western kind. The thing is that it also extends to Central Asia, which is where we theoretically came from quite some time back, if you want to look back as far as the Yamnaya. Now, that might be a bit before chariots and horse culture, but I doubt it. If, in fact, we don't have evidence from that period, it's probably simply because it hasn't appeared yet. Now, I read about it and promptly forgot, so it may be that you're well into horse culture evidence by that time, but it doesn't matter. The steppes are the place of the horse. We clearly made a deal with the horse and with other herds. We incorporated it into our culture, and it has affected us in innumerable ways. And so what we have here is a memory constellation for our culture, the image of the horse and the signs that represent aspects of material culture that are tied to this. And then, as I said, you have etymology, which is linked to the signs, and you can see the word associations running from left to right in the signs below. So you can work from left to right on the bottom, or you can look at the sigils surrounding the horse and go clockwise. But the first one is milk. And I will be going into each one of these in detail. You won't be looking at this plain white screen forever. But milk is a fundamental aspect, perhaps the most fundamental aspect of our culture. Not only does it mark us as mammals, those who drink from the tit, creatures with fur, and we, of course, look to any other creatures with fur who nurse as being related to us, and we domesticate and raise them, whereas we think of things like insects or reptiles or fish as alien by comparison. So we are the tribe of milk, and milk comes first. Were that not the case, we would not understand enough about the behavior of furry herd animals based on our own experiences that run in parallel, because we share the genetic lineage. If we didn't have that, we would not have a basis for understanding them enough to make a deal with them and domesticate them. Well, what comes next? And again, I'll go into all of these in detail in what follows, but we have tag, which is the idea to mark, tagma, damga, tag, tasso. There are a number of etymological roots there, and they all cluster around what I use mark with a three-letter mnemonic as tag. The next one is hide, the skin of an animal, which also gives you hide of land and also hidden. You know, wolf in sheep's clothing. There are a number of elements there that we'll cover. Then bind, then gad, like a gadfly to sting, or ye gads, or the gads, referring to the nails that bound or pinned Christ to the cross. The gad is the spike, the stinging thing, the stimulus, the kentron, the goad. Then you have bit, which is control. You have breeches or break, braque, the idea of trousers, which are a form of dress tied directly to horsemen. Only horsemen wear trousers. And if everybody wants to talk about cultural appropriation, then all the motherfuckers across the globe wearing our blue jeans should fucking take them off. The next sign is sever. Saber, savor, SVR for sword. Then sed, like sedentary, seat, saddle. Then we have stirrup and heel. So each of these symbols, each of these objects, each of these signs that represent an aspect of material culture that really is, not in any arbitrary way, tied to horse culture, is constellated here around the image of the horse. So what I'm getting at here is that we have the words historically that we know we use to refer to these things, and then we have the things themselves represented as signs so they can be held in memory, and then the central object that they cluster around, which is the horse, symbol of our horse culture. Oh, John Ski notes I missed gird, which also gives you garth and garden and ward and warden and girdle. Yes, garden like kindergarten. That is the belt of nobility. We'll be covering that as well. You'll notice that there are 12 signs because memory favors brevity, and 12 is usually the largest set that we can easily grasp in our memory at once. And also, happily, it's rich in factors, allowing it to be divided by 1, 12, 2, 3, 4, and 6, which is far better than base 10 systems, but we don't need to get into all of that. So let me jump over here and give you the image of the key, which should now be visible to you. Get it nice and as large here as can be seen. Okay, and I just need to cue up my text here because I'm going to be working from notes. Because the first point about all of this is that I set it up to be a, this is a mnemonic system, and I wanted to make this accessible to me. What a lot of people don't understand is, you know, when you take a look at something like the Kabbalah, whatever you want to call it, and the Sephiroth, you know, the Tree of Life, the 10 Sephiroth, or 11 if you count Doth, the paths between them, 22 in number, that are said to correspond to the tarot in terms of, you know, late 19th century, early 20th century syncretism, like you see with the Golden Dawn or with Aleister Crowley. Even if you go back further to something that's more genuine, where you have the idea of each of those Sephiroth being a domain, a kind of archetypal realm, and each of them together, each of them covers a specific aspect, and when taken together as a set, they can be used to collate all that is in manifestation and to order it under categories. So in the Sephiroth, you've got the idea of, you know, Keter, the crown, Hokmah and Binah, you know, Chesed and Gabora, mercy and might. These are ideas of domains. Now, you can look at it also in terms of the systems of divine names, where you recite different names of God as you move across a set of beads. Well, in this case, what I did is I stole some of that, or I approached that through a stolen device, which is the Guidonian hand, which was a mnemonic technique using the fingers and the joints as a way to remember music. But I needed a set of 12, and happily I learned that with some Indian traditional music, what they do is they count on the joints of the fingers. So you can move your thumb across the 3 segments of each of your fingers, and it's a quick way in groups of 3 to count through 12. And so in sequence, with the thumb on the tip of the index finger, you have milk, then tag, then hide, then bind, then gad, then bit, then brick, then gird, then sever, then sed, then stir, then hell. And in that system, you have all 12 of these items. Now, this is me being a little bit cute, but the idea is that this is a way to encapsulate and have at one's fingertips, literally, the mnemonic elements that allow you to grasp in your hand, to hold. And that's literally what apprehend and comprehend mean in Latin, is to take in hand. You can take in hand chivalry, and you can do so through a memory tradition. So rather than having recourse to an imported system like the Kabbalah, which comes out of all kinds of Semitic roots, and you can find variants of it that are frankly very much interesting, at least as interesting as the Kabbalistic stuff you have with esoteric heterodox Shiism. And that too comes out of this Semitic system, but I wanted to anchor it in something more tangible, because there's something left of old Rome in me, perhaps in my genetics or whatever. The idea is that it has to be brought to earth. It has to be made tangible. We have to hold it in our hand. And like our hand extended before us into the world of things, it must become a tool. And chivalry was, to whatever extent it was something that was intellectual or spiritual, or something that would be contemplated on some level that extends beyond perhaps the physical, it was always a very physical thing. Being a chivalrous culture gave us success in war. And so you can imagine this as a kind of mnemonic Kabbalah counted on the joints of the fingers, or reckoned, I should say, on the joints of the fingers, to allow us to take in hand through a system of shorthand note, all of this thing that we conceive of as chivalry, and thereby to get a hold of something that is like the catena, the chain of the cultural elements that lie at the deep roots of our Western culture. So I'm going to jump into that, but before I do, I'm going to give everybody here a moment, and I will close this screen sharing just for a moment so you don't have to just look at this picture forever. If I can find it, go ahead and let me know, folks, if you have any questions before I move on. This is going to take us a little while. There's a lot of material here. So I should, in theory, be back on screen. And I'm going to give you a few moments to ask any questions if you need any clarification, and then I am going to move on. Let me look at the quotes here. All 12 zodiac signs which represent the personality of man. Yes, the 12 zodiacal signs are definitely something that weighed on this. The zodiac is about animal signs, little animals. And I believe that those animals were representative of concepts and behaviors and even techniques, the way that we have with, for example, monkey kung fu or tiger kung fu, or, crane form, or, the various ways in which human beings use animals to be representative of attitudes, behaviors, or given things. We can say that a person is, a dog-like in their loyalty, or wolfish in their predation, or a woman who's catty. I believe that those signs were an attempt to lay things out in that way. But it goes very deep indeed. As soon as you look at Gemini, then you say, by Jiminy, Jiminy Cricket, Gemini, Jiminy, strange. The twins. Who are the twins? Oh, they're the Dioscuri. Right? Oh, the Dioscuri. Oh, well, that gets interesting because you've got the image of the Dokana, which is a door frame said to represent the twins, the Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, who are Gemini. And that door frame is like a gateway, but it looks like the Gemini sign, which isn't so much the number 2 as it is the doorway. And holy shit, linguistically, Gemini is related to Yama, and Yama is the god of death. But wait a minute, Castor and Pollux, the twins, one of them is alive, and he had to share is immortal and had to share his immortality with the other, and so they trade time, one in the underworld and one above the world of men. And it goes with contracts and covenants, the Dioscuri. So as soon as you dig into, that's just one sign out of that zodiac. And in a similar way, though I'm not going to claim so much heritage for what we have laid out here, at least as a formalized system. Of course, the roots of what I'm drawing on are certainly that old. Anyway, I hope that what I'm laying out here has something of that in terms of being something deep that you can dig into. All right, waiting for the closed fist of these icons. There was no version of that I put together, but that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. All right, nobody is speaking directly about what's on screen, so thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to move on. We will now go back to viewing this on your screens. And off we go. Hopefully you can all see this. So I open this up with the question, where is the horse and where is the rider? The metaphor of the horse and rider, like the earlier metaphor of the chariot and charioteer, which was ancient even when Plato discussed it long ago in Phaedrus, is a central cognitive device or memory image. In Spanish, we have caballo, horse, and caballero, gentleman. In Portuguese, cavalo, horse, and caballero, or some shit like that. I can't pronounce Portuguese, certainly. Horseman or gentleman. In French, we have cheval for horse, and we have chevalier for gentleman, or knight. In German, reiten is to ride, and ritter is a knight or a gentleman. In English, we have cavalry and chivalry. Clearly, the horseman is a very old and important symbol of individual empowerment. In many cultures, to ride is to be distinguished and elevated. The signs associated with horse culture comprise a book of chivalry. It's only necessary to trace the vestiges of what once was long ago. Chivalry is expressed here as a memory tradition in which a given set of objects, literally material culture, encodes constellated meaning and knowledge. The associated images, signs, and text we present are intended to foster awareness of a whole greater than the sum of its parts. A Gestalt view of how deep cultural archetypes sometimes operate continuously, regardless of whether we happen to be aware of it. They're also intended to stimulate the viewer to consider the richness and continuing applicability of these cultural archetypes as a consciously understood heritage, one that lays bare the nature of the social forces in operation around us, regardless of what it may be fashionable to call them today. Now, before I go on, I realized I made an enormous mistake. I forgot to tell you about who painted the images that you're seeing. In this project, I worked with a very talented oil painter named Eric Stevens. Hang on, you know what I need to do? I need to show you the background for this, and then I'm going to pick up on this again. My bad. I should be spreading the love, because none of this would have happened had it not been for my friend working with me and doing these paintings to help me realize this vision here. So I'm going to stop it. You're going to be looking at my ugly mug momentarily, and I'm going to go over to the other application screen here. There we go. Share. Boom. Okay, you guys should be able to see what we have here. This is the set of paintings. This was an exhibition long before it became what we're going to discuss this evening, which is this digital thing that has been sitting in a box for years because very few people got exposed to it. So I worked with a very talented oil painter named Eric Stevens. He executed all of the oil paintings that you see in this. You're going to have, these are shots from the exhibition in Texas. You're going to see close-ups of all of these images, so do not feel as though you're, this is the only chance you're going to have to look at it. But the way this was set up was with 12 images and 12 associated texts, and I'll be going through all of them with you. Again, the whole purpose of this was to capture aspects of Western culture and hopefully to get to a point where they could be held in our hands so that we would have chivalry, so to speak, with all the lessons associated with it at our fingertips. All right, so let me get out of here. Hopefully you guys saw that. Where's my chat window? Did you see it? Okay, good. Hopefully it's all there. All right, so we're going to save our share screen again, and I will continue. So the name of the painter, again, Eric Stevens, Eric K. Stevens. And for those of you who want to follow along, there's a PDF available on his website with his paintings, and it is called Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition. So if you just go to Google right now and search on Google for the PDF, Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition, you can pull up the PDF that I will be working from, which I produced. So let me go back over here, share the screen. And this should now be visible again. So where was I? I was just talking about the horse and the rider. And this is an important image to me, because if you get into the esoteric aspects of this, it gets very interesting. So I'm into the material culture. I'm into digging up the old bones of our culture, the shared elements that go with horse culture that reveal our deep-seated relationship in history with the Turks and the Mongols and other steppe peoples. We think so much in the West about the sedentary sort of late horsemen, but in our roots, we came into what is now Europe from points further east, and we brought with us our horse culture, which the Turks share. And when you see things like, milk as the first sign, there's a reason. We drink cow's milk. With the Mongols or the Turks, it might be yogurt or kumis. But since we share that fundamental element, we can trace the set of older relationships. So the esoteric aspect here beyond, the historical stuff like I just touched on, or, how behavior can be encoded in objects, and the mnemonic aspect. There's also the esoteric, which is the idea of the horse and the rider. We don't have a horse mounted on the back of a man. We know that what is right and proper is a man mounted on the back of a horse. And in the systems of esoteric chivalry, which are reflected in Persian and Southwest Asian, and even in some of the Middle East, certainly Anatolia, traditions called futuwah, which is a kind of spiritual chivalry. These things survive, but you have the idea that the rider is the soul and the horse is body. So we can see one of the central myths of the Western man, the idea of Pasiphae and the bull, and how the bull mated with Pasiphae and gave birth to the Minotaur. And the bull was Zeus in his form raping Pasiphae. But Pasiphae is like the Minotaur, the product of the divine and the mortal, is half animal and half man, and trapped in the labyrinth of manifestation. And so you can look at that version that comes from the ancient Greeks, and certainly from the earlier and much more developed, apparently, Minoan and Cretan culture. You can look there for this lesson about being half man or half animal, or you can jump forward in time to Robert Flood's engravings, where you see a figure who is chained at the wrist to an ape, which is the idea of the soul being bound to the body and having this dual nature. Well, I choose to reflect that same element in this system more simply and economically, I believe, through the image of the horse and rider. The soul should govern the body. The right reason should govern the emotions. This is the image. We say wild horses, getting loose, or torn apart by wild horses. So the horses represent the body and the passions and the fury and the energy of physical manifestation. The rider is the soul that, with perfect equilibrium, should sit astride that beast and guide it. Hence, I ask, where is the horse and where the rider? Here in manifestation or elsewhere? Or do they only come into existence where the horse and rider meet? And who are these things? How are these things? What rides? And what is ridden? So the elements on display here, the material objects that preserve and articulate culture expressed in visible images and these graphical signs with the accompanying text, all of these elements on display here have been chosen based on the ancient arts of memory, in which objects and images in space strengthen and order recollection and serve as a basis for compositional invention in the living imagination. They help the viewer to remember and meditate upon the various irreducible elements that come together in the culture of chivalry, both the exoteric and esoteric senses of that word. They're designed to link in non-arbitrary ways with historical realities and to provide the simplest possible key, since memory delights in brevity and conciseness, to a vast interrelated collection of cultural wisdom common to all cultures for whom the riding of horses represented an ideal. So it shows us a stratum that we share with those further east, but that lie in the deepest roots of our own culture. Again, what rides and what is ridden? And there's a great quote I like here. This is from Michel de Montaigne from the 1500s, and it's from his essays. He writes, "Whatever Chrysanthus in Xenophon may say about it, you blend your worth and fortunes with those of your horse. His wounds and death involve your own. His terror or his impetuosity make you either rash or cowardly. If he is hard-mouthed or needs the spur, it is your honor that answers for it." Now, he was talking about how a rider could be pitched from his horse and look like a fool because the horse was not under control. The rider was not riding, not in his proper relationship with the horse, but extend that to the soul and the body, to the reason and the emotions, and you will grasp the esoteric application of the various things I will be covering here. Now, we're going to jump over to the first sign, milk. Hopefully everyone can see that now. Just make sure no one in the chats is saying that they can't see anything. All right, good. Nice. All right. Hands look weird when you look at them for a long time. Yes, it's like saying your name over and over and over again until it means nothing. So you should now see milk. Now, what's interesting about milk, remember I said that we deal with this linguistically as well as through these signs, right? The objects chosen here for good reason are not our Western images. This is a bowl and ladle used by Central Asian steppe dwellers. I think this is from Kyrgyzstan, to ladle milk. And there's a reason that there is the idea of a moon hidden in it. There is a reason that the sign for milk is a hanging tit, but it also looks like the head of a bull. It also looks like a point of moisture about to drop from an orb. There are reasons for that sign, which I think is one of the finest I crafted here. And it is to represent MLK, milk. In Greek, we have gala. In Latin, we have lac, and it's milk. Perhaps you're wondering why it is that for some unknown reason, everybody decided to latch on to the idea of milk as being a sign of white supremacy. Odd that all these lactose intolerant sorts, or those who don't easily have ready access to milk, would somehow resent us for the fact that it's like central to us. And it's certainly no mistake that the fucking social justice warriors with their almond milk and, you know, low-fat milk, white water, and all that other crap are trying to remove us from our relationship with milk, which has made us so strong. Anyway, the first sign is MLK, milk, moloko, Greek gala, Latin lac. Our Milky Way derives from the Latin term Via Lactea, which is what the Latins called the Milky Way. Here the drama takes place. That's why it's the first sign. We must contextualize and orient ourselves. We are here in the universe, but a specific part of it, the Via Lactea. In our galaxy, galaxy being a word which in turn derives from Greek galaxias kyklos, the Milky Circle. Is it just a coincidence, I ask you, people, that we call the part of the vast universe that is our home the place of milk? Surely it's just a coincidence. Surely it's just a coincidence that they hold up glasses of milk and talk about them as a sign of racism, when it's one of the deepest secrets of our culture. And the great twisting branch of life called mammals are those of the breast. We are those who potentially walk upright among those mammals, able to crane our necks towards the milk-filled bowl of the sky. Some of the tribes of the West have been drinking the milk of the kind kin for close to 10,000 years. 10,000 years. Crack your teeth upon the nut of this immense fact and watch the fashions of the day, each a gnat's life, grow gaunt in their ephemeral farce. Milk is food for baby kine, but these our kin consented to the yoke of domestication and gave us milk from their teats. And we, suckling, grew long and strong-boned, square-shouldered and steady. The drinkers of milk have prospered. In exchange, we nursed the gadfly-ridden and drove off predators, culling and killing no more than we needed to eat. That was a long time ago. Today, the cow is caged, and the trust we negotiated with her broken. Some even feed her the ground-up paste of her own. It was likely women who first negotiated our arrangement with these animals long ago, before anyone ever rode a horse. And today it is women first, with sensitive noses, who turn their heads away from red meat and milk, preferring more fashionable fare. Perhaps this should be noticed, even recognized as a warning. If the symbiosis of man and herd continues to suffer such senile abuse, one of the most basic and ancient of life ways will disappear. When the milk is poisoned, the horns of the moon turn red. The twins of Rome were suckled by a she-wolf, and the milk of wolves runs thick in senile empires. Milk, a noun from Old English mjölk, from Proto-Germanic meluk, Old Norse mjölk, Dutch melk, German milch, Gothic milux. Milk as a verb, from Proto-Germanic melkanan, and compared to Old Norse mjolka, Dutch and German melken, both from Proto-Indo-European base melk, wiping or stroking, referring to the hand motion of milking a teat, compared to Greek amelgein, Latin mulgere, and Old Central Slavic mlesti, Lithuanian meltsu, to milk, Old Irish melk, to milk, Sanskrit marjata, to wipe off. The figurative verbal sense of exploit for profit as a meaning for milk first appears in the 1520s. So perhaps deep in our culture is the sense of milking. The virtue is always the heart of the vice is always the heart of the virtue. And so in keeping herds and milking, we learn to abuse it and exploit it. And the result is cattle, chattel, capital, a captivating misuse of the ars notoria. So that as a kind of introduction to the first sign. The second sign is tag. Hopefully you can see this well. Tag, both the sign and the painting. This is the branding iron. Let me just make sure that I haven't lost anyone over here in the chat window. Okay, it looks like we're still going good. Nice. Okay. So the next sign in the sequence of 12, chivalry at your fingertips, somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 years of culture, all summarized in a set of signs. You can thank me later. Certainly no work was involved in constellating all of this in a non-arbitrary way. You know, and as you can imagine, I was paid well for this because so many people are interested in this. Showing any kind of concern like this is a thankless process. I'm so happy that there are actually a few people here listening to me drone on about it. So this sign is tag. We have Greek tagma and Latin signum, tag. Long ago, we moved together with the great herds. In following them, we learned their ways and to read the marks of their passing. Those who could recognize their signs learned to distinguish, to divide, and to order. The world unfolded the tapestry of its kind in category and instance. We learned to read the sign. And when I say read, I spell that R-E-D-E, which means to judge and to assess and to heed. It only later became read, which means to heed the law, and then eventually R-E-A-D with a different spelling to read as we talk about it today. The roots of what we call read and reading had to do with noticing and heeding and obeying or acting in conformity with whatever was intimated by the sign. This has to do with all of the shit I go into with mark studies. And now I'm going to have to do a little pause here. So I'm going to stop it and you will be able to see my lovely visage here. Okay. If you want to know more about all of that, this is Traditional Marking Systems. I was one of the 3 editors for it. It is a collection of essays by scholars from around the world, many of them from Russia, Central Asia, Europe, and it's all about marks and signs. And I did the introduction to it, and I did the first study, chapter 1, which will go into a lot of what I talk about under this sign of tag. If you want to know more, there's also Remarks. Both of these books are available on Amazon. I'm not trying to sell them to make any money off it because I won't get a penny. Someone else has the rights. I just did the work for free. But Traditional Marking Systems, and this one, Remarks, has a study of marks and how they're used today that's very interesting. You can find those on Amazon. And there's also this one if you want to go get the Elsevier Publication Language Sciences. This is one I did that, you know, got properly peer reviewed and everything as a Festschrift for a Oxford scholar, Roy Harris, who was being celebrated by this issue. So if you're interested in the stuff I'm talking about right now in this image under the sign of tag with the branding iron, those books will help you to find out more about it. So I'm going to go back to the screen share and continue. Okay, so you should now be seeing tag again. So we learned to read the sign. The later, more limited sense of read, as the interpretation of something written or printed, reveals the narrowing of the scope of our attention, with the attendant dulling of our wits. Most time, it's best not to read what you read. So wolf track equals wolf. The relationship between the sign and what it indicates is not arbitrary. Not only does wolf track point to wolf, the particular track points to a particular wolf. So we developed the use of the mark as an art, learning all of this by reading the signs of animals in their passage. That's why we read letters in text in a sequence, the way we read tracks as we walked along a path in a forest. That is why writing is fundamentally masculine, no matter how good women might get at it. We are the ones who contrived it, and we learned it from animals who taught us to read and write. That's what's so stupid. All the fucking post-Marxist, postmodern leftist Kabbalists with their jumbling together of letters in universities tell us that language came first. And I'm here to tell you, as a result of my studies, that it did not. Writing came first. Only our false association of writing, or our false conception of writing as a thing made possible by speech, allows us to miss the obvious, which is that we were writing and reading in the sense that animals leave marks and read them, read instead of read. We were doing that long before we ever spoke the first word. Animals in particular don't have spoken language, and they all read signs. Why would we be any different? Only man's anthropocentric, masturbatory self-congratulation leads us to believe that we're somehow different. And it's that same worship of the text, devoid of any meaningful connection with reality, that allows those who come from the religion of the book to be, and those who come after them, in their secular variations, to be ripped up from their roots in real experience. So, and then this is why I said wolf track equals wolf, because you can say that, well, I write the word wolf and it brings to mind a wolf, and that's how writing works. Well, that's cute, but when you've actually been out there and you can say, wow, that track shows a big wolf, and he's an old wolf, and he's a male, and his gait, as represented in the tracks left in the ground, indicate that he's aggressive. You know, we think that the words stand for all those things with just category and instance, but in our oldest form of writing and reading, which is reading the signs, the specific wolf was indicated by its mark, not just wolf in general. So we developed this use of the mark as an art, elevating it beyond its beginnings in animal, territorial, and environmental marks. We learned to mark objects, places, and people, hence the branding iron. We learned to tag them, but tagma is about order and categories, which is tagma. It comes from the same Greek roots as tasso and tax. To tax is to mark, to show ownership. We say words like consignment, or to consign, to send someone somewhere with a mark, consignum, or to charge them. To charge them means to make them bear a weight or bear a mark. And we have people who've been punished by having M for malefactor or V for vagabond burned into them. So official seals. We learned how to mark objects, places, and people. And with the modern brand, we have learned how to mark minds. Official seals, monograms, heraldic and military insignia, tax stamps, license plates, cattle brands, corporate insignia, all are marks we use to organize the space around us and the objects within it. At the deepest level, neither written nor spoken language applies. Here we enter the realm of the territorial mark that provokes aggression. Look at how people react if you simply raise up a swastika banner. They'll freak out and start foaming and screaming and attacking. Look at how you can take sheaves of paper covered with confusing black marks and make someone almost fall down to death with terror. If you've ever been served with a suit, you know it's not what's in the suit that matters. It's that someone showed up at your house holding up a sheaf of papers with baneful samata, with evil marks upon them. And you know that there is a spell that's been cast against you in the form of this suit. They display to you the marks that have been scribbled against you. Of course, we'll all say, oh, what is he talking about? He's insane. No, this is what lies at root in our experience of all of these things. All these marks that I mentioned, the the corporate insignia and the rest. You know, as I said, neither spoken nor written language applies to them. There's something before spoken language. Here we enter the realm of the territorial mark, as I said, provoking aggression. It's like a trap baited with sex scent that draws prey, or the hierarchical disposition of piss marks on trees. Now, I don't go into the detail here, but the bottom line is that animal territorial marks that are visible come out of animal territorial marks that are scent-based. We just happen to be highly visual creatures. You know, as primates, we look for colored fruit that we can identify in our environment. We have a weak sense of smell. With animals that mark with scent, they mark the objects in their environment and order their space in that way. Since we have weak noses, we mark it with visible signs. But there is, of course, a real issue with the way in which we sometimes combine them. So in our bathrooms, in a public restroom, at a bar, you're going to see all kinds of aggressive and sexual remarks scratched into the wood of the bathroom stalls, like an animal scratches into the bark of a tree. And it's all at the spot where the overlapping scent signatures of a bunch of people pissing in the same place indicate that there's competition for status. I can't go into this, or we won't be able to get through all the different images, but this is a very, very deep one of the symbols that indicates how we order our lives. These are the signs that organize us into demographic groups. Greek demos for common people, people designated categorically, plus graphein to represent by written characters. A demographic is certainly is a summary of the desires. You know, when we say a demographic to refer to a group of people, but of course it's really it's not a noun. But when you make it a noun, you're referring to the sheets of paper that describe the psychological and financial and emotional characteristics of a group of people. They're summarized by a sign. They can be dealt with by head count. They're cattle, chattel, capital. By contrast, instead of being a person with a bad character who needs to be given a character, having it imposed upon them, the noble man, the chivalrous man, the one who is on top of the horse instead of allowing the passions to ride him, the one who stands apart, who is unique, who is self-governing, the archetype of the empowered Western male, that person is a man of character. Coming back again to tag as character. The character of the chivalrous man is unique. It can be shared with no other. This is excellence of character. The bad character is one that is shared, one that is held in common. The worst character is that imposed on others, like M for malefactor or V for vagabond that I mentioned earlier. Remember all of this that I have said, or as Polonius said to Laertes, look thou character, which means impress this upon your memory, mark your memory with this character, and thereby gain character by remembering something that matters and organizing your behavior around it so that you're not simply a victim of your passions and instincts. In summary, we have the word tag. We've got tagma from Greek, which means ordinance, command, fixed assessment or payment, body of soldiers, division, brigade, generally an arrangement, possibly of footprints, status, or function. Compare these to Turkish tamga, which means clan sign, Mongolian tamaga, which means clan sign, horse brand, or banner sign. And we can see with the Poles, they call it tamga as well for the house signs that are called Hausmarken among the Germans. This all points to the fact that we share this culture across Central Asia, and Turks are related to us culturally. We can look at Afghani tagma, which is metathesis, going from tamga to tagma. Related to this is tactics, from modern Latin tactica, from Greek taktike, techne, art of arrangement, from taktikos, of or pertaining to arrangement, especially tactics in war, from taxis, order, verbal noun of tasein, to arrange, from Proto-Indo-European base tag, to set aright, compared to taxonomy, all tied to tag. Also token, from Old English taken, sign, symbol, evidence, related to taken, show, explain, or teach, from Proto-Germanic taiknan, compared to Old Slavic or Old Scandinavian, one or the other. Yeah, Old Scandinavian, that can't be the word. It wouldn't say Scandinavian, it'd say Norse. It must be Old Slavic, tekon, Old Norse taken, for zodiac sign, omen, or token. Old Frisian, Middle Dutch, teken, Dutch teken, Anglo-Saxon takna, Old High German zeichen, German zeichen, Gothic teken, sign or token, from Proto-Indo-European base dake, to show, compared to teach, the verb. Old English taken, to show or point out, also to give instructions, from Proto-Germanic taikigenon, from Old High German zihan, German zeichen, to accuse. Gothic getaihan, to announce, from Proto-Indo-European dake, to show, point out, related to Old English taken and teken, sign or mark. That is the tag. And now we jump to the next one, which is hide. And I may not be able to get through all of these. I may just do a couple more, and you guys can seek out the full document and go through it now that it has been explained, because I'm going to put everyone here to sleep. All right. It looks like some people are following this. All right. Well, I'll keep going for a couple more of these, and we'll see if anyone is interested. But I don't think I'm going to get through all 12, because I will be here all night. All right, so you should now be able to see hide, which is another one of these symbols in my set. Again, we're talking about material culture as a key to explore this down into the past. And we're also talking about the linguistic element and bringing them together. So with hide, we have the Greek word metis, the Latin word kaleo, which I characterize as cunning. Odysseus Polymetis, who epitomized the Greek ideal of cunning, introduced himself to the Cyclops as no man, which in the original Greek was outis, and in a later passage, the variant metis, also no one or no man, a clear pun in the original Greek of Homer for metis, cunning intelligence. Odysseus and his men blinded the one-eyed Polyphemus and escaped by hiding in his flock as it exited the cave. Think, too, of the Trojan horse, how warriors were hidden in the body of a horse, covered in its false skin, so to speak, and how foundational it is to the idea of Western cunning. He who stands atop a hide dances on the back of a bull. A hide of land is the amount of space a family requires to live, as recognized by ancient law. But to grasp the dimensions of that hide and how it is to be deployed in the world, one must know and understand the story of the Carthaginian queen Dido Elissa and the ox hide. When she arrived with her weary people in what was to become Carthage, she requested as refuge only as much land as could be covered by an ox hide. The people that she was negotiating with foolishly agreed. So she got the largest ox hide she could find, and she took out a bronze razor, and she took it to the hide and cut it into a single paper-thin long strip. Now you can find out more about that paper-thin long strip under the symbol BND for rope, which is bind, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. So she took that long string, so to speak, that she made from the giant ox hide, turning it into a cord, and using that, she encircled the top of the highest hill, claiming the entire hilltop, and thereby won refuge. She changed the dimensions of the exchange. Now, of course, exchange in European languages, you can take a look at bors and bursa and bursa and purse, which is the idea of a skin pouch that holds money. The same hide forms the basis of shield and shelter. We are wrapped in an ox hide shield 7 layers thick when we fall through the stars, drugged senseless again by Lethe. This is the skin that conceals by revealing, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Odysseus also enclosed the Greeks in the wooden skin of a horse, and Cyrus, the Great of Persia, long before him, carefully left the gods of each conquered state's pantheon in place. He simply took his place among them. The etymology of hide comes from the roots of cover and conceal, a Persian mountain tradition. We can compare this to taqiyya. We even call our flags are colors. And yet motorcycle gangs with their jackets that have the sign of their group on the back call them colors. A curiously persistent archaic remnant. Etymologically, the hide as a concealing cover, the roof, cloak, and shield relates to heraldry. The blazon on the shield, and in Latin for shield you say scutum, which is skin, and flags, which we call colors. Now, color goes with kaleo, which means it ties to some of the etymology that we're about to take a look at. The flags, which we call colors, like a skin held aloft. If these colors conceal by revealing and reveal by concealing, what then are our true colors? Hide as a verb from Old English heiden, from West Germanic huthjanan, from Proto-Indo-European kuth. Compare this to Greek kuthein, to hide or conceal, from the base skew, to cover, conceal. Hide as a noun, from Old English hid, hide, from Proto-Germanic hudis. Compare to Old Norse huth, Old Frisian head, Middle Dutch hut, German haut for skin, related to Old English verb heiden, to hide, the common sense being covering, from Proto-Indo-European base skew, to cover, conceal. Compare to Sanskrit kosta, enclosing wall, or skunati, covers, Armenian q for ruth, Latin cutis for skin, scutum for shield, obscurus for dark, Greek kitos for a hollow vessel, kutho to cover, to hide, Russian kishka for gut, Lithuanian, or literally sheath, Lithuanian kiautas for husk, and kutis for stall, Old Norse sky for cloud, Middle High German hod for scrotum, Old High German skura, German scheuer for barn, Welsh kudio to hide. I'm sure I've just absolutely butchered all those foreign words, but you get the point. Download the PDF if you want to read it. And color as a noun, from Old French color, from Latin color, accusative colorem, color or hue, from Old Latin colos, originally a covering, akin to celare, to hide or conceal, from Proto-Indo-European base kel, to cover or conceal. Hence, at the outset, why this is hide, Greek metis, Latin kaleo, cunning. All right, I'm going to do one more, just one more. We'll do bind, which will get us through, three of these. So we'll get through, no, four of these. So we'll be getting through more than one digit. And I think that will be more than enough, and I will take questions. So the next one of these that we will cover, and the last, again, if you want to find this, just go online and do a search for Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition, and you will find a PDF that has the images and a lot of this text. I did it sometime back in cooperation with a very talented oil painter named Eric K. Stevens. Okay, so where is bind? All right. Now this one was taken from a rodeo man's rope, which was surprisingly stiff. The painter had to get a hold of the original one in order to be able to paint it from the real thing. And I was really surprised what these ropes were like. You can see the sigil for it that I created at the top. It's self-evident that should be that is a rope. And of course, the rope of binding here before us, another central element of Western culture, another central element of horse culture, which is at the roots of Western culture, and one of the tools of the horsemen. Now, I'll grant you that, milk was pretty kind, or I should say milk was neutral and had positive aspects. Tag that we looked at seemed very dark. Well, so did hide in a number of respects. So too will bind. But the bottom line that all of us try to hide from is that we come from a very dark, very cunning, very oriented for advantage kind of people. And so these signs that we're going to consider here are dark in many respects. There are others that are in this set that are not so dark, like gird, which is related in some ways to bind, because you can gird yourself with a belt, and that belt that you gird yourself with is in some sense item that binds you. So there are overlaps between these different symbols in the set that can be meditated upon. One of the problems is that the deeper this stuff goes and the less arbitrary it is, certain features emerge out of it that I didn't even see in creating it that become rather interesting. So, okay, the next symbol is bind, B-N-D. We've got Greek deo and Latin lego, meaning bind. To bind is to bend, to entangle and knot. It is also to bring together the band based on shared bonds. We see the same in Latin lego, to bind, and ligamen, a bond, providing the basis for our word league, as well as ligament. While in Greek we see lugizo, bend or twist, throw or master, and lugo, tie fast, bend or overpower. The bonds that bind us are not always physical. A far more effective tool for binding across generations is the word. A cruel master whenever it is forgotten that the image always precedes it. Latin lego means read, as well as gather and collect. And in that to read is to form a judgment or take counsel. Words bind our thoughts and actions. The dwarves, goaded by gold, found a way to bind the wolf, the wild wolf, Fenrir. The bond of their making was named Gleipnir. This well-spun yarn was made of 6 things that were never seen in this world. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the milk of a bird, the breath of a fish, and the nerves of a bear. Compare Barsarkar, neither fire nor iron told upon them. What is most wild, the wolf of old night, is bound fast by fantasia. Words are spells. Words spell spells. The stake, any conviction, anchors our fetters, which themselves fix the radius of our possible action. Meanwhile, we run first this way and that, blind to the fact, barking like dogs on a chain. Of course, this describes a perfect circle in the dust, which we've all seen, where a dog chained to the ground runs in circles around the thing that pins him to the earth. It forms a perfect circle because we are bound. Look to the image if you want to understand what I'm talking about. The same chord serves as measure. The knotted cingulum, or cingulum, was used as basis for laying out the fire altars of old among the ancient worshippers who had Vedas as their sacred texts. In this respect, it is a rule. Compare sutra and suture. The image also subsumes spinning and the manufacture of cloth. Here again we find text and textile. And the mudra of the upraised hand with thumb touching the middle finger is the Buddhist sign of teaching. But this is nothing other than the gesture of the spinner as she guides the thread. The same gesture signifies the following again of such a thread in recollecting the contents of memory and presenting them to an audience. Knowledge of BND, bind, reveals the spin doctor as a leech. Compare gird, G-R-D. So you can see how this is both the rope of binding, which goes with horse culture. You need it to lasso, to handle cattle, to control animals, but it also becomes a way to bind. You can extend it to the harness of the animal, which is formed of rings and belts. So you have a cinch strap around the main body of the animal. You have bridles. You have all sorts of things associated with tack that bind in a loop, that contain and restrain, that bind with bonds. And even the rings that allow the leather come together are parts of those bonds and bindings. And we represent those metaphorically when we make oaths to bind ourselves one to another. Instead of having a ring from a piece of harness, we have an iron ring originally of Roman citizenship. We have a gold ring that we slip on our finger to symbolize an oath that we make of binding one to another. That is why it is the circle. And a figure like Tolkien, who was steeped in all sorts of these etymological relationships, said one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is the ring that can be a positive binding, like a league, in league, or a band of brothers tied fast by bonds of friendship, but also the binding that holds people down and makes them subservient. So we have band as a noun, Old Norse band, thin strip that ties or constrains, from Proto-Germanic bindan, related to modern English bend and bind, from Proto-Indo-European bend, to bind. Also an organized group from Middle French bande, traced to the Proto-Germanic root of band, possibly from a band of cloth worn as a mark of identification by a group, and or as a metaphorical extension of the idea that such men are bound together. Compare Gothic bandwa for a sign. Then we have bond as a noun, that with or by which a thing is bound, anything that binds. Phonetic variant of band, influenced by Old English bonda, householder, literally dweller. Compare this to husband, husbonda, male head of household. We have bind as a verb, to make fast with a band or bond. Old English binden, to tie up with bonds, literally and figuratively. Also to make captive, to cover with dressings and bandages. Old English bindere, one who binds. CF bindle, bundle, bandage, and bondage. Then we have bend as a verb from Old English benden, to confine with a cord. Causative of bindan, to bind, from Proto-Germanic base band, string or band. Compare Old Norse benda, to join, strain, strive, or bend, from Proto-Indo-European base bend. Compare Gothic binden, Old High German bintan, Sanskrit bandnati, binds, Lithuanian bendras, partner, and Old Persian bandaka, subject. So we have been through milk and tag and hide and bind. So 4 of these we have been through, and the basics of this system and the various signs collected together should be apparent. And we have this idea of a key, to have all of these elements at our fingertips, to be able to reach into culture. And again, this is something that is, as far as I can tell, non-arbitrary. I chose to follow the tracks left in the sand of the past by our own words. And I chose to follow cultural features that we know our ancestors were involved with. So I'm looking to the things that we know our ancestors used, the horse culture aspects, the objects, the saddle, the stirrups appearing rather late, probably no earlier than about 400 AD. But the heeled boot is another one that's covered. The saddle, the stirrup, the sword, the belt or girdle, the breeches, the rope, the goad or kentron, the bit, the hide, the tag or branding iron, and milk itself, all centered around the image of the horse. And so I know this may be a little bit much for all but a few of you, but I wanted to lay out how I did this, what approach I took, what elements I tried to put together, because in large part we're engaged in a process of attempting to reconstruct our past, the history of our people, of Western kind, if you will. And in the course of that, if we look to the historical texts, there's quite a bit to be learned. And obviously I had recourse to them when I looked at the etymological meanings and all the rest. And I rely upon a whole lot of hard work, much of it possibly misinterpreted by me, but a lot of hard work done by academics and who look at linguistics and etymology, comparative linguistics, historical linguistics. But the bottom line is that this is anchored in material culture. And if you want to call bullshit, just go use the object, because scholars can write about it all day long. But when you milk a cow or skin one or hunt beneath camouflage or use a bit or handle a sword or find out physically how a heeled boot changes how you move. And believe me, I've found out all about it, because the flamenco shoe is a tool. Most people don't know that our shoes in the West are a tool that's unique to our culture. Nobody wears the kind of footwear that we do. And it's a horseman's footwear with a heel designed to go over a bar stirrup that raises us up, that changes our posture and our actions, that changes things like how we choose to fight. All of these things are knit together in these systems, and I wanted to, or this system, which is a construction of mine, but again, not an arbitrary one. And so if nothing else, you can, of course, explore the system I laid out, but also using these techniques, you can create one of your own for yourself. And now I will return from this screen share. Thank you, all of you, for joining me. I wound all over the place with the initial stuff, but hopefully there will be some of you who dig it, who have the background and experience to see the value in it. I don't assert that what I presented there was necessarily something that you need to internalize as your own, but in looking at how I went through making it, you can learn how to unpuzzle or even craft such things for yourself. I'm going to go now. It's late, and I've had a lot of whiskey. Get it? Got it? Good. Semiagog, out.